Hey everyone, John P. here. Today I'm going to be answering your questions that you've asked me over on my Instagram, The Real John P. From time to time, I do post a story where you can ask me pretty much anything and I'll answer it for you here in this video, as well as in chopped up shorter forms on the Instagram Reel and a little bit on TikTok too. Not too much. I kind of had to set that one aside. It's really, that platform seems to be, a little bit fidgety. If you know what I mean. But nonetheless, I do chop it up and put it different places out there for those of you that do like to kind of view the content in that way. So go over to my Instagram, The Real John P, give me a follow, and feel free to ask me questions that I incorporate in these videos. So we're gonna jump right into it. We're gonna talk about things like, where's the watch market today? What are we seeing at Delray Watch where we buy, sell, trade? Are there gonna be watches that are gonna be discontinued in the future? And so many other things. So let's jump right into it. And this is kind of an obscure watch brand. They don't make a lot of pieces, and that's because it is really a watch brand for the camera company, among other things, Leica. And this person asked me, what are my thoughts on Leica watches? Well, if you've seen the Leica watches, they have a couple of generations of this, and there's a recent version called the monochrome, which is an all-black version of these watches that are really made to look and have the feel and the aesthetic of kind of the Leica cameras. And I think they're pretty cool, unique, and interesting, especially if you're kind of into photography. But the reality is, they just shouldn't hold value. It's a very niche type of watch, and other types of watches that are built on partnerships like this, unless it's some unbelievable pop culture reference, they just don't do well in terms of holding any type of value or desirability. So I think they look cool and interesting, but at the price points, I personally just wouldn't think it's a great idea. Next question, in your opinion, where do you see the market in the next 3 to 5 years? I think it just depends what type of watch we're talking about, but overall, there is more watch collectors every day. Watch collecting has become more of a widespread hobby. It was, 10, 15 years ago, it was ultra niche, kind of the forums and things like that were the hobbyists and the enthusiasts, and then you had kind of the casual purchasers that maybe wanted to buy a Rolex or something when they retired perhaps, or just they wanted a nice flashy or a nice timepiece. So you have more of a transition into these enthusiasts because let's face it, people don't really need watches when, to live or to function when you do have other ways of keeping time. So I think because there's more watch collectors, we're gonna see the market stay pretty stable from where we're at, if not continue to slowly climb in terms of just desirability for certain watches. But that being said, these kind of hot blue chip pieces, think certain Rolex models, maybe not quite the Daytona, because that's, for the most part, been desirable the last 10, 15 years. But, maybe Submariners and things will become a little bit more readily available. A little bit more is kind of the key word, especially as Rolex builds new production facilities, which they've announced. So I don't think the market's going to go further down much more, but, there's so many other economic and international factors. Anything could happen, right? A world war could break out, right? It could. It's easily within the realm of possibility. And then, people just don't really want to buy watches for hobby because, they're a little more concerned with other real things that matter for living, right? So it just kind of depends, but, all things remain constant, probably continue to go up a little bit over time, much more steady, probably like it was, 8 years ago. Next question, what are your thoughts on the Rolex Sky Dweller with the blue dial? Do you think it will be a good investment? I do not advise. I don't give investment advice, right? That is not what watches are for me, even though I'm a watch dealer, right? It would be beneficial for me to try to sell you on investing in watches because it's much more about, hey, this watch will increase in price and this is a logical decision. There's logical people out there. But a lot of people just want to buy what they love and enjoy. And when it's a hobby, it's not always going to be about logic. You might just enjoy it and you want to enjoy your life. You want to look down and enjoy however it looks on your wrist. You like that particular thing for whatever reason, sentimental or otherwise. So I really don't give investment advice. But that being said, this still seems to be a relatively desirable model, but especially this particular dial. But I really don't think this is something that you should invest in if there's other options out there for you. Next question, kind of more of a comment, but they say, Rolex now, it is crazy. Well, I think that Rolex 2 years ago was crazier. I think that Rolex a year and a half ago was crazier. Today, it just seems more of a function of, hey, a lot of people bought these watches as investment pieces, or they bought these on speculation, or maybe, they didn't really want them, or it wasn't like in their best interest financially to do so. And they did it anyway, not because they want to wear it and enjoy it, but it was kind of like, hey, I'm going to pocket this, put it in the back of the safe, and then pull this out and make a few bucks, because that's kind of what was happening, right? But Rolex has announced they're going to be building, and they've already started building new production facilities. And yeah, sure, they have this kind of like nonprofit status in Switzerland, what have you. But in reality, they need to function and operate just like a business, because if they're not growing, they're shrinking. So they need to grow. And if they can sell more pieces, why wouldn't they, right? They've continued to do so, and they haven't seen anything but an increase in demand and a lack of supply for the demand. So they'll continue to do so. That is likely what they will do. Now, this person asks, why do people geek out so much over Grand Seiko? Grand Seiko offers something a little bit different, and sometimes people want something a little bit different. Even myself, I don't necessarily want to wear like the watch that everyone wants. I want something a little bit different. And I do like, quality, attention to detail. And that's something that Grand Seiko offers, even in their more approachable pieces, right? You get one of their quartz watches, it still feels like a really great watch that their automatics and mechanicals and spring drives offer. And that's something you don't see from a lot of brands. A lot of brands really cheap out on the more approachable things, the $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 watches. They kind of cheap out sometimes if they have more expensive watches with higher margin that they'd like you to slide into. So that's what people like about them. They like the fit, the finish, the attention to detail, and that's something that you just see come out of Japan a lot, and it resonates and carries over to Grand Seiko, and that's what I think the collector likes Grand Seiko. Let me know in the comments below, Grand Seiko guys. The diehard enthusiasts, chime in below and really let your fellow collectors know why you like them. Next question, will polishing affect the value of the watch? It depends, right? If you have a watch that is probably not going to be some type of collectible or ever really stand the test of being sent to an auction, Sotheby's, Christie's, things like that, right? But it's still a nice watch or something like that. Yeah, polishing, yeah, maybe it'll affect the value, but a few dollars here or there, it's negligible maybe. But if you're talking about, very expensive watches, precious metal, gold, Rolex, Patek, Philippe, polishing it, Audemars Piguet, mind you, polishing it is going to affect the value. It is, it's going to affect the value. Those watches tend to be more expensive, and the value that it removes may be roughly the same percentage-wise, give or take, but they're going to be more valuable or pricier watches. So overall, it's going to affect the value more if we're talking about like finite value and not relational or proportional to the whole total of the watch. I know I said a lot there, but basically, if the watch is, kind of positioned to be collectible, then, it's going to hurt the value a lot more from the way that I view it. Now, this person asks about the SBGR325, and they say that there's too many limited editions, and they want to know if this is a good value watch, or maybe if it's a more value-based platinum Rolex style. And I think they're really talking about this particular color of blue, and it seems to be a little bit deeper than the platinum dial or the platinum, Daytona, for example, that uses a similar color dial, or some of the other Rolex models like the Day-Date with this color from Rolex. That it was a very hot color. It's still pretty desirable. It's come down a bit, but nonetheless, they're just not even in the same playing field, right? It's totally different. I can't really say, hey, the Grand Seiko is a more value, platinum Daytona. I mean, we're talking about a difference of $100,000 here. So both in their own segment, I think Grand Seiko probably just said, hey, this color seems to be hot right now. Let's come out with something, and it'll probably sell. And they are right. This person asks, how do you like your Aqua Terra Good Planet titanium so far? I'm actually wearing it on my wrist today. This is the Omega Seamaster Aqua Terra Good Planet in titanium. I really like this watch, not because the size is really great. It's a more, modern day mid-size, but vintage jumbo, they would call it, in this kind of, just north of 38 size. But the titanium, right? Like, this is a metal bracelet on a metal watch, and it's very light. I like that because It's not encumbering. I don't have to necessarily take it off, right? You do certain things, right? You type on the keyboard, depending on how fast you type, or you do other things where it's like, hey, maybe this is just kind of getting in the way. Because of the titanium and how light it is, it just doesn't get in the way. And I like that about the watch. I'm a big fan of titanium. So as you can see, I think it's a pretty great choice, especially if you like Omega. This person asks next, what do I think about the new Omega World Timer? I think it's great. Collectors seem to really love this model in the previous version, and now that they have a new version, I think it really goes to show that Omega listens to the collectors, they see what collectors want, and they produce either more of it or something similar. Now, they don't always knock it out of the park, but no one can, right? Sometimes you're just gonna get struck out, but sometimes you're gonna hit a home run, and that's what Omega does, and I think this is probably a home run. The retail prices are climbing up, but that's the world today. So setting that aside, I think they're doing a great job almost across the board. And I'm pretty excited to see what they do with this, this model and this family in the future. Let me know what you think, comments below. Now, this goes on to the next question that says, do you think amid a recession, Rolex prices will dump like Panerai did? Well, I think, it's possible that Rolex prices could go down, but we have to consider that Rolex buyers are international, right? We're not just talking about the US market or other markets. And even when there have been fluctuations in watch prices, it's changed differently, right? People sometimes would even travel, especially dealers, to places like Italy or different parts of Asia to buy Rolex and Omega and other watches at much more favorable prices because of exchange rates, economic conditions, so forth. And so, the dumping, I think it really just depends, where, probably in the world, but compared to Panerai, I don't see it, because even though Panerai has some history and heritage and, the Italian Navy and things like that, they do not have the same type of long-standing production that Rolex does, the amount of inventory pieces they've produced, the type of notability, notoriety, and really Rolex is ingrained in pop culture, whereas Panerai, it's very niche. There's gonna be people that'll fight me on this in the comments below, but you say Panerai, people say, is that something in the kitchen? You say Rolex, people say, oh, Rolex. It's different. It's totally different. And I don't think Rolex will dump, but once again, I've said this in the past, it depends what goes on in the world. But if everything's kind of the same, I don't really see Rolex being like dumped. Like if people are dumping Rolex, it means there's some serious problems in the world. Next question, what is your favorite Grand Seiko model? Now, this is going to be the SBGA325. This is a little known model cased in white gold with the same fit and finish that you know and love, if you know and love about the Grand Seiko fit and finish. And this came in the door at Del Rey Watch recently, and I love it because it's got kind of that stealth high-end feel to it, right? White gold, that's what it is. People could be wearing a $40,000 Omega Speedmaster, for example, and someone might think it's $5,000. Now, okay, do you need it? It's kind of, it could be a waste if you just like a whiter metal. But interestingly enough, white gold just gives off kind of a duller sheen and less shine to it than stainless steel, for example. So it's a little bit different, but this watch really just did win me over. The dial, beautiful, kind of like snowflake-esque dial. I thought it was great, little known, and it sold, I think, the same day, pretty quickly. So, clearly there are other people that love this watch. Now, this question, I know there's the diehard Christopher Ward fans out there, but this person wants to know what my thoughts are on the Bell Canto as a future collectible, and I don't see it. I mean, the amount of horological value that Christopher Ward bakes into this particular model, I think is phenomenal, possibly unprecedented, and definitely impressive. But that being said, Christopher Ward is a fairly new brand. I mean, we're talking the last, 15 years, right? And even so, they've really just gained notoriety and speed as, an admirable brand in the last 5. Previously, they were kind of like a newer micro brand, very, very affordable in terms of their offerings, very junior, but they've built out. And this model here really, technologically speaking, is impressive, especially for the price. but I just don't see the brand adding a lot of, extra value and notability that's required to make kind of a watch a collectible or a cult classic. I think they'll probably try to sell as many of these as possible, just considering they're a newer brand, and that's kind of what happens with newer brands. Let's sell as many pieces as we can to fuel growth. So I don't see it, but then again, I'd still really like to check out this watch in the flesh in the near future. So if you have one, Chris Ward, feel free to send one over. Would love to put a rebuttal here and do a review of the watch on this channel. Next question, will Rolex discontinue the Wimbledon dial? Now, the Wimbledon dial, there's different variations, and technically, you have some non-gray and green dials that are still considered a Wimbledon dial, and there have been some variations of the Wimbledon that have been, ceased in production, but, not as much chatter about these watches as you'd hear from like a Daytona or a Sub or things like that, because people really like the sports models, and that's what gets a lot of chatter, a lot of clicks, a lot of PR, and kind of the more the Datejust and the OPs and things like that, they're kind of set by the wayside. But that being said, Rolex is usually discontinuing their dials. There's very few dials that are not discontinued, right? I mean, because they change references. And so it just depends, they make updates and things. So technically, yeah, that previous version is discontinued of that dial. But that being said, the dials go away, they modernize it, new cases, things like that. So yeah, I mean, that's probably what's gonna happen, because it always happens because they come out with new references. And the last question we have here today, it's Patek Philippe. And this person wants to know, what are my thoughts on the Patek Philippe Golden Ellipse? Are the vintage models a good buy? I would say that a few years ago, vintage Golden Ellipses, most of the references, you could not give them away. But that being said, kind of the rising tide lifts all boats, and Patek Philippe, because they're hot models, across the board, their references, even the old stuff people kind of thought was obscure, the gondolas, the things like that, people have really started picking them up, because they've been a better value than the other things offered by Patek Philippe. But because of that, the desirability has gone up, and so have the prices. So overall, I think it's a very cool line, and I am somewhat surprised that it's really stood the test of time, because it's not a common shape. And from what I see at Del Rey Watch, non-common shape or recognizable watch shapes just are not easy sells. For whatever reason, let me know in the comments below what you think about this, particularly the non-traditional watch shapes. But I like them, I think they're cool, and I wouldn't mind adding one to my personal collection in the future. I personally would just kind of have to find a time and a place that I would really want to wear it. It would be a little too niche for me, I think, for my everyday wear. But once again, buy what you love, and you should not have many regrets about your watch collecting experience. So guys, this has been me answering your questions that you've asked over on my Instagram, The Real John P. Make sure to go over there so in the future you can ask away. Do not forget to check out delreywatch.com. We got so many cool new watches in for you to check out. And we'll see you next time. You've been chatting with John P.